The road seemed to spring from nowhere, too straight to be the work of chance. Cities arose in an organized fashion, as if someone had planned each street before the first brick was laid. The land was divided with almost frightening precision, preventing conflicts that could last for generations. All this gave the impression that Rome was a natural, inevitable force. But it wasn't. Behind every line on the ground, behind every invisible boundary between one man and another, someone was working silently, long before the legions marched and long after the battles ended. Today, you will meet the man who designed all of Rome without ever wielding a sword. If this story has already changed the way you see the power of Rome, then take advantage now. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Here we reveal the invisible behind-the-scenes stories that truly sustained the greatest empires in history. And your support is what allows this content to continue being produced and reach more people interested in seeing history beyond the obvious. The man who designed Rome without ever wielding a sword walked silently while the legions still slept. The sun barely touched the horizon, and there, in the middle of a seemingly ordinary field, he planted a stake in the ground. There was no glory, no applause, no flags. Yet, in that simple gesture, lay hidden a power greater than that of many generals. Because before Rome conquered territory, before soldiers marched, before cities arose, someone needed to decide where it would all begin. And that someone almost never appears in history books. While popular imagination sees the Roman Empire as a world of battles, bloodshed, and military expansion, the true workings of Roman dominion began with invisible lines drawn on the land. The Roman aggressor carried neither sword nor shield. He carried measuring instruments, mathematical knowledge, and a silent authority. Wherever he passed, chaos gave way to order. Where his lines intersected, cities, roads, properties, taxes, and laws were born. Rome did not dominate solely by force. It dominated because it knew how to measure, divide, and organize. This man observed the terrain with almost obsessive attention. An error of a few centimeters could generate disputes that would last for generations. A poorly calculated slope could render an entire aqueduct useless. A road off-center would cost time, money, and control. Therefore, every decision was final. When he marked the ground, that mark was not merely physical. It was political, economic, and social. It was there that someone would live, there that someone would pay taxes, there that someone would inherit land, there that someone would quarrel with their neighbor decades later. The instrument that seemed too simple to sustain an empire was the groma. A vertical rod, crossed arms, wires hanging with weights. But, in the right hands, it became an extension of Roman logic itself. With it, the aggressor created perfect angles, straight lines that ignored natural irregularities. The landscape did not dictate the rules. Rome did. Rivers, hills, and valleys were challenged by geometry. The territory was shaped to serve the empire, not the other way around. After a conquest, when the smell of war still lingered in the air, the aggressor was one of the first to arrive. Even before the settlers, before the veterans who would receive land as payment for years of service, he was already there. His job was to divide the newly conquered territory into rigorously equal plots. Almost perfect squares, repeated like an obsessive pattern. Anyone observing from above would see an implacable geometry spreading across the field. This method not only avoided initial conflicts, but reinforced the feeling of absolute control. Everything had its place. Everything had an owner. Everything was registered. And when conflicts arose, because they always did, the aggressor would return. Two neighbors arguing over a fence. One farmer accusing the other of encroaching a few steps beyond what was permitted. This wasn't resolved with force, but with measurement. The map spoke. The line spoke. What was drawn became undeniable truth. The aggressor's word ended discussions. He wasn't just a technician. He was a judge. His knowledge carried legal weight. Its accuracy was worth more than emotional testimonies. With the growth of the empire, this work multiplied. Rome needed roads that connected distant cities in record time. Roads that would allow the movement of troops, goods, and information with almost modern efficiency. And again, the aggressor came before the builders. He defined the most efficient route, calculated inclines, avoided unstable terrain when possible, and, when that wasn't possible, adapted the engineering to overcome the obstacle. The result was roads so well constructed that some still influence the design of current roads. Aqueducts, the ultimate symbols of Roman engineering, also depended on this invisible work. The water needed to travel for kilometers, maintaining a minimum and constant incline. Too little, and the water stopped. Too much, and it destroyed the structure. There was no margin for error. Before any arch was erected, the aggressor had already decided whether the work would succeed or fail. He didn't build, but determined the success of everything that would be built afterward. Initially, this trade was practical, almost artisanal. Experienced men taught apprentices. But with civil wars and territorial expansion, demand exploded. It was necessary to divide land quickly, fairly in the eyes of the state, to avoid revolts and disputes. The empire realized that this work could not depend solely on informal experience. Manuals, rules, and standardized methods emerged. The aggressor land grabber became formally trained. Mathematics, geometry, and Roman law became an essential part of the apprenticeship. Many of these men came from the army. They had already learned to measure land for encampments, to assess areas for marches and battles. Upon leaving military life, they took with them knowledge too valuable to be wasted. Others came from humble origins, but with a talent for numbers and observation. Rome, pragmatic as always, did not care about origin. What mattered was precision. A reliable surveyor could serve great generals, governors, and even the emperor himself. However, there was a clear difference between those who worked with the army and those who worked in civilian life. The military aggressor operated in contexts of tension. He needed to choose defensible locations, anticipate movements, and ensure that the terrain favored Rome and not the enemy. He prepared the space for war. The civilian aggressor, on the other hand, dealt with peace, or rather, with maintaining order. He ensured that taxes were collected correctly, that cities grew in an organized manner, and that conflicts were resolved without violence. This distinction reveals something profound about the empire. Rome was not sustained solely by military victories, but by the ability to transform conquest into stability. Without territorial organization, the empire would fragment. Without clear records, rebellions would arise. Without efficient roads, control would be lost. The aggressor was the bridge between force and administration, between the sword and the law. Now, I want to hear from you. After learning about this unseen character who helped sustain the Roman Empire, comment below. Did you ever imagine that the true power of Rome lay in those who measured, organized, and decided over the land, and not just in those who fought? And take the opportunity to say which other forgotten character from history you think deserves to be revealed like this, behind the scenes of power. Over time, the impact of this work became so profound that it shaped landscapes for centuries. Even today, in some regions of Europe, it is possible to identify land division patterns inherited directly from Roman practice. Lines that have survived empires, kingdoms, and modern wars. It all began with someone standing silently, looking at the ground, measuring the world. And perhaps the most impressive thing is this. While emperors fell, while famous names were lost to history, those lines remained. Invisible to many, but fundamental to all. The true power of Rome lay not only in palaces or battlefields, but in its ability to transform space into system, land into order, conquest into permanence. Now imagine how many stories are still hidden like this, supporting what seems obvious. How many other invisible men and roles kept the world running while the spotlight shone on others. If this story made you see Rome in a new light, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Which other forgotten historical figure would you like to see revealed here? This helps the channel grow and ensures that more stories like this continue to be told. The content reveals how the true power of the Roman Empire lay not only in the legions or the emperors, but in the silent work of the aggressors, responsible for measuring, dividing, and organizing the conquered territory. These professionals, using instruments, with simple yet advanced technical knowledge, they defined land boundaries, planned cities, roads, and aqueducts, resolved legal disputes, and ensured tax collection. Operating in both military and civilian contexts, they transformed conquests into order and stability, allowing Rome to administer a vast empire for centuries. The summary shows that, without these invisible men, Roman expansion would not have been sustainable. If this story made you realize that real power often operates in silence, then now is the time to strengthen this type of content. Like, subscribe to the channel, and participate in the comments, because every interaction helps bring to light other hidden stories that shape the world without appearing in traditional history books. Here, the story is not told by the most famous, but by those who truly sustained everything behind the scenes.